In this topic, let's talk about one particular strategy for branching and merging database code, the Gitflow strategy. Now, Gitflow is a way of using branches to keep work separate by all developers, but then quickly merging it back and trying to coordinate all the work amongst all the requirements we have for different types of work. Now, there's a master branch, but this is typically reserved for just our production releases, and then we make copies of this for different parts of development. Now, on this slide, I have an image of the typical Gitflow flow, I guess, or the Gitflow diagram, where I've got the master branch on the far right and then separate branches for various items. We typically make a development branch where we copy all of our changes at some point in time, but we don't develop directly here. We don't have all individual developers work here. Instead, for each developer, as they get a piece of work, as they have a feature to change or a change in our database, they make their own branch. So they make another copy of the code, another copy of a database for database work. They'll make their changes, and as they make their changes, they periodically merge their changes not back to master, but to that development branch, because this is what's deviated from production and from our master. And these are all the changes that are the work where it's ongoing. Periodically, what we'll also do is we'll create a release branch, and we create this from our development branch, and we periodically move those changes from development to the release branch when we think they're ready for release, so that we can release independently of the work we're doing in development. Of course, if hot fixes are needed, we work on a branch created from the master branch. We don't work in master itself, but we'll have a branch there. We can fix code there and deploy it back to master, merge it back to master and deploy it to production. We'll also need to merge those changes to our release branch and our development branches to ensure they're up to date with things that have changed in production. Now, once these changes are merged, our future releases should all make sense. We shouldn't have any conflicts or any issues. Our development then continues. We'll make new branches as needed. We'll destroy them as the changes are merged back in development. Eventually, at some point, the code will be released, and all those changes from that release branch get merged back to the master branch. Now, the image shows how this works. Each of the colored dots represents a commit or some work that's changed. Each of the vertical lines is a different branch. Now, many companies don't follow this exactly, but they use a similar method of branching and merging code to track their development. They may not have a hot fix branch, they may not have a release branch, but they typically do have some sort of development branch or separate branches for developers. For databases, the key is that each branch needs a separate database. So if we look at this image shown in this particular Gitflow strategy, we'd have two feature branches, and that means that we would really need 5 or 6 copies of our database that are separate databases for separate development by each branch. That means we have to be able to test there, and we've got to have all the resources to have those separate branches. We have disk space for all those. So if I had a terabyte database, this would be 6 terabytes of space. Now, if I want to include CI, typically I want to have a separate CI pipeline. I want a separate CI pipeline for the developers. I certainly at least want one for my development branch, but I probably want one for my release branch as well to verify that the code that I've moved over actually passes my tests and works correctly and compiles. The difficulty with doing database development in this manner is that we have a large number of databases that have to be tracked and managed by developers or at least by somebody in the development area. You have to be aware of where your branch should be linked to which database, and that can become confusing. Often the best way to do a Gitflow strategy or do something similar to this is you need some process that will automate the creation of a branch. And the creation of a branch means the branch in version control, create a new database, pull the code changes from the version control and apply them to this development database or this particular database, load up any test data I need, have that all wrapped up to a simple function or a simple process. Because without an easy way to create new databases and branches, developers are going to start to share branches and they may disrupt each other's work. Or they won't create new databases and they'll switch branches. So they'll lose data in a table, lose a column, and they'll try to add it back and they won't have any data to put in there, and it can quickly become confusing and frustrating. The more often that we have merging happening, the more often that we have updates happening, the simpler this becomes. Certainly the easier this is with a process rather than manual work, the more likely it is that your developers will adopt it. Now, a final note on these complex branching strategies. No matter what tools you have, no matter what flows you build, it doesn't alleviate the need for the developers to communicate and coordinate with each other. After all, one of the primary goals of DevOps is to foster communications for all of the people involved, right? We want everybody to work closely together and share what's happening. If you depend on the system or the version control to manage all your conflicting code changes, it's a bad idea, especially in database work. Our application code, Some of the code we write in database is often highly dependent upon the particular structure and schema we have. And if two developers are changing the same structures to meet different requirements, and they're not building on the work done by others, then anything else they do that depends on those changes could be a wasted effort, or it could be a problem when we try to integrate that code together. It's better if both developers realize early on that their changes may conflict, and they're only going to learn this by communicating with each other. Now, merging can certainly be disruptive. It can be a pain. It's cumbersome, but communication is a much lower interruption to work, and we should communicate as much as possible. Try to communicate fundamental changes to the database among everybody that might be affected, and ensure that nobody else is taken by surprise when they get your database changes in their branch.